What is up, world? This is America, and we are back again for episode 5. We're gonna do our social segment. This one is a little bit special of an episode because whether you know it or not, today is a holiday for the American people. So I'm Hobson McCain,
I'm Mark Ray Redmond.
and today we're gonna be talking about Juneteenth. Now, what is Juneteenth, you say? Juneteenth, 1865. June 19th, 1865. That was the day when the last slaves in America were told that they were free. Now,
keep in mind, the Emancipation Proclamation came in 1863.
Now, so this is 2 years and 5 months after the Emancipation Proclamation passed. It was a time of different communication. You know, people was riding horses. They wasn't out here sending emails and stuff. So Abe couldn't just email.
Stop you right there, Chief. The Emancipation Proclamation, everybody heard about that. But, doing our research for the show, this is something that I should have known before. The Emancipation Proclamation came during a time where, the Union had succeeded from the U.S. The Confederacy had from the U.S. So, the President of the United States saying to let go of your slaves really didn't hold any weight to the Confederacy. They said, bro, we're not going to let our slaves go. We're actually not going to do that. And you're going to have to make us. That's really like the gist of it. They said that the South is ran by slavery.
Yeah, and with along with that point, so this was two and a half years after the Emancipation Proclamation had passed, and I forget the name of the general, but he sailed up to Texas and he announced to all the slave owners that slavery was over.
Now, Ulysses S. Grant?
No, it wasn't Ulysses S. Grant. It was some other guy that his name got washed away in history because he delivered the news that the slaves were free. So he wasn't important as, Paul Revere, who told us the British were coming. But anyway, so Mr. General comes up, tells all the slave owners that slaves are officially free and they have to let their slaves go. The slave owners, they didn't like that, obviously. Slavery was a huge, and when I tell you huge part of the reason that America is economically where it is today.
It's the driving force initially because, capitalism is fueled by cheap labor. It doesn't get much cheaper than the slave.
Than free. It can't get no more cheaper than free unless you wanted the slaves to pay you. So, the slaves contributed $300 billion worth of wealth to the establishment of the United States. $300 billion.
Didn't get a dime.
Most families are still waiting for their 40 acres and a mule. But the slave owners, even after they were told by the American military that slavery was over, they said, nope, we're going to wait until after our next harvest because we can't harvest this stuff ourselves. So they waited another 4 or 5 months until their harvest was done and then freed the slaves. Now, Mark,
they didn't free their slaves until Robert E. Lee, waved the white flag. They didn't release their slaves until after the Civil War was over with.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. The Civil War, after the Civil War was over with, that's when the general came and told them to let go of their slaves. That was in 1865. And then that's what I'm saying is like 5 months after that, they released their slaves.
The Emancipation Proclamation was in 1863. Yeah. So quit saying that law freed the slaves. That's false. That's almost fake news.
Almost, but technically, he wrote it in September of 1862, and it was came into effect in January of 1863. But like Mark said, the Confederacy wasn't really adhering to United States policies at that time. So let's talk about what did it mean when they said that the slaves were free. So now everybody's equal, right? Like everybody's walking around holding hands, and kumbaya.
We talked about a couple episodes ago. See, this is how freedom has worked for black people in the United States. It's always a catch. Like when they freed us in 1865, They allowed black men to vote, not black women, just black men. And the black men had to be able to read and write. They had to know American history, coming out of slavery where they weren't allowed to read and write. So you see that it in itself is kind of a trick bag that they're putting you in. It doesn't make any sense. They're going to tell you that you need to be able to read and write to be able to vote. But if you're able to read and write, that means that you were breaking the law the entire time you were a slave. And in 1865, that's more than enough to get you lynched. It's more than enough for something to happen to you and your family, and nobody will care because it's 1860 America.
Speaking of lynching, 1866 marks the date when the Ku Klux Klan was formed. This is very coincidental, considering 1865 they had just freed the slaves.
Just freed slaves. KKK pops up.
Yeah, so the KKK, everybody. I mean, if you don't think the KKK is a bad organization by now, then you don't even need to watch the show. You can you can go do whatever you're gonna do. But obviously, the KKK was formed in response to the freedom of the slaves.
Who were the members of the KKK? Weren't there, politicians and policemen and, judges and lawyers, doctors? It was like, we need to quit the fallacy that the KKK was made up of a bunch of, outsiders to the American culture. The KKK was booming in 1866. It was booming up until basically the Civil Rights era, and even then it was booming. So even today it's coming back because, our boy DT is in office spewing the rhetoric that they support. He has
and just so that we can avoid the controversy behind what you just said, I'm just gonna say Donald Trump isn't out here necessarily advocating for racism, but we've seen in Charlottesville he doesn't condemn it. So
his policies are very reflective of the ideologies held by white supremacists.
Yes. So
such as promoting super Americanism, like we're trying to be super nationalistic. Make America great again is kind of looking past all of the wrong that we've done. He said that every country has done wrong when he's talking about Russia. He doesn't really believe that about the U.S., I'm sure, because he wants to make America great again. He wants to go back in time. He doesn't want to focus on...
That's the big question.
Like, America's been great before in the past to, I'll say, one group of people. I think that we all understand who that group of people is. So there's no need for me to elaborate anymore. For you to say to make America great again makes no sense to anyone of African descent. At all.
It can't. So
I don't want to go to 2012.
That's a fact. These 3 years. Actually, we've been degrading a little bit, but different conversation. So 1881, Jim Crow laws began to get passed, and in 1896, the Supreme Court ruled that segregation was constitutional. So, in the 30 years following the freedom of slaves, the American government did a lot to ensure that these freed slaves weren't going to make any leaps and bounds in terms of moving up in society.
When black communities did start to thrive, such as Black Wall Street, which many of you might not have heard of, you can Google. Black Wall Street was a real place, and it got burnt down because it was making too much money. This was, I want to say, late to 1800s, early 1900s when this happened, because black businesses, this was literally Black Wall Street. There was only black businesses on the street, black consumers, and it was like what we should be doing today, where we should have a massive support for black-owned businesses. And that's what we're doing in late 1800s, early 1900s, and then it was literally burnt to the ground by white supremacists.
Those are facts. So, in the spirit of Juneteenth, we're gonna go down a little rundown of, what happened after segregation was ruled constitutional. 1954, Brown versus Board of Education ended educational segregation. 1965, the Voting Rights Act. Mark just said that black men were given the right to vote, and
18.
1865.
Hmm?
Yeah, 1865. 1965, the Voting Rights Act was passed to end the disenfranchisement of black voters, which is different than giving black voters the right to vote. It's saying
Yeah.
that it's saying that the government cannot instill policies that are biased towards certain individuals to keep them from voting, such as the grandfather clause, meaning if your grandfather didn't vote, you can't vote.
Yeah. But
Um,
does this pertain to Hispanics today with, you know, them asking for paperwork when you're trying to vote? Is that a form of disenfranchisement, or is
well,
that slippery or slope? Because
yeah, that's a slippery slope. Yeah, because if they're not citizens, then technically they don't have the right to vote. So
I can understand that you
yeah,
don't pay taxes.
you don't pay taxes. If you don't pay taxes, then you shouldn't be voting in the election. I can agree with that. I'm not gonna.
And the argument is
Yeah,
not really too far fetched. Like if you're not paying to support the
but
government, you
but
know.
today,
But at the same time, we acknowledge that it's very hard for some people to be legal, and that's why I brought it up because, in a way, like if we just dismiss the way that people are treated in the U.S. because they're not legal here, you know, like kids at the border, then you see how we look to the rest of the world. It looks very inhumane the way that things are being handled. If we
and the fact that the process to becoming a U.S. citizen takes years, years.
so
Not it's not a easy process. It's easier to buy an AR-15 than it is to become a U.S. citizen. End of
it's great.
story. We'll end that conversation there. Um, so anyway, just to further elaborate, Juneteenth is a celebration of the freedom of Black Americans, and it's not recognized as a national holiday. We celebrate Columbus Day, who was a mass murderer and a racist and a terrible navigation expert. He sucked. He was the worst.
One
Um,
fact: Christopher Columbus thought he was in India because that's where he was trying to go. That's why they called the Native Americans here Indians. That's not what they are. They're Native Americans. It's disrespectful almost to call them Indians. That's why the Redskins logo has had the issues that it's had. Indians logo for baseball has had the issues that it's had. People don't like that term because it's inaccurate, and it stems from Christopher Columbus, who showed up to not even to the Americas. He showed up to the Dominican Republic and Haiti. Like that's what they are. That's what they are now. I forgot what it was called when he showed up there, but he showed up there and basically
he murdered everybody.
through the lands and called them Indians the whole time, even though he wasn't in India.
So we have holidays to celebrate men like that, and we don't have holidays to celebrate the literal freedom of a huge portion of the population of the United States.
People
Um,
that built the country.
literally built the country with their hands. Um, so it's a little bit backwards that it's not recognized. I had never heard a president mention Juneteenth. I'm sure that a lot of black individuals in the United States don't even know what Juneteenth is because it's not taught in schools. It's not taught in colleges, as far as I know. And unless your parents tell you about it, you're probably not going to know about it. So y'all go out, look up Juneteenth because the fight that they were fighting back then is very similar to the fight that we're fighting today with the take a knee, with the Black Lives Matter, and people misrepresenting how we're protesting the killing of our brothers and sisters.
First and foremost, you cannot tell people how to protest. That makes no sense. For you to tell me how to protest is you to tell me the way that protesting won't bother you. And the best way to get ignored is the way that you're going to tell me to protest. I don't want the entire purpose of a protest to be seen.
And the fact is that we were already told how to protest, saying that make sure you're peaceful, don't destroy any property, don't do anything like.
I mean,
When
I
we do
understand.
that, and I understand. Although I'm not saying that we need to be going around destroying things, but I'm saying that even when we adhere to those rules, we're criticized and demonized and illegitimized because some don't like the agenda that we're pushing, which is freedom from persecution.
Fun facts. People like to make the kneeling situation about something that is not. Colin Kaepernick, initially when he was taking a knee, initially when he started protesting, he sat down on the bench and was called out for it for being disrespectful by veterans. And it was suggested he talked to one specific one. I forgot his name exactly, but he played in the NFL and he was also a Marine, I do believe. This man told him that kneeling was not disrespectful because kneeling is something that, soldiers do when they're honoring a fallen comrade. And honoring fallen comrades in the United States that were victims of police brutality or just racial injustice in America was the entire purpose of Colin Kaepernick taking a knee. And he did it in a way that was supposed to be not disrespectful to the flag.
Taking a knee quiet. He's not screaming, singing, no hymns or anything. He's quiet. Yeah, he's quiet and respectful during the national anthem, but because his legs aren't straight, people start flipping and losing their minds. So, with the, you got something else?
Make it seem like the protest was about the flag or the anthem, both of which are protestable. Like the national anthem, the third verse that isn't sang literally glorifies the murdering of slaves. If you just read it, go on Google the third stanza of the Star Spangled Banner, and read it and see what it says. It's glorifying the murdering of slaves. You can say, well, it's not talking about slaves in the U.S., bro. That is pretty irrelevant, and it's pretty, I'm not going to say it's racist for you to say that, but it's very insensitive for you to tell me to not care about other slaves. That, to me, just makes no sense.
When there were slaves in the U.S., in the same position.
Flag while you have on a flag on your hat or on your shirt.
Or holding it horizontally before a football game, which you're not supposed to do according to the flag code.
You're breaking the flag code. Colin Kaepernick didn't break the flag code. He didn't disrespect the flag in any way, shape, or form. He just protested peacefully in a way that he was told to do by a Marine because that wouldn't be disrespectful, and he understands and he supports the cause. People that are saying that he's disrespecting the flag and disrespecting the anthem are doing the same thing that people did in the past and ignoring the root of the issue. They're not focusing on what he's actually trying to tell them. They're focusing on what he himself could have done better. And instead of focusing on themselves and, the reason that he is protesting, they're victim blaming. People don't like it doesn't make sense to blame the victim in a situation like this, especially one that has such a historical precedent. It's not like he's just saying that, Trayvon Martin got shot in 2012 and Mike Brown got killed. No, that's not what he's saying. That's part of it. That's the headlines. Those were headlines, but this is a much deeper issue. This goes back to 1776 and before, when racism first originated. The slave trade, chattel slavery, was new, and we were the only people in the history of the world to ever be a victim of it. We were the only people to ever have grandparents be slaves, their kids be slaves, their kids' kids be slaves. That's different. That's slavery that only lasted, it only was taken seriously in the United States, and it was justified by a lot of things that they're using, to justify things today. Like they're using the Bible to justify separating families at the border, the same way they use the Bible to justify slavery. The Bible itself does not justify either one of them. The Bible itself says in the new covenant that we have with the Lord, He said that you're supposed to treat your neighbor as if you wanted to be treated. Those are not the exact words, but that's the gist of it. And if you just treat your neighbor the way that you want to be treated,
the world would be a great place.
Any issues. But instead of that, you want to cite passages like the curse of Ham to support racism. And you want to cite, you have to obey the laws of the land to support
because the government is ordained by God. That's what Hitler said.
The different way that we see immigrants, and we just see people that aren't, the model Americans in this country today really bothers me because everybody that's here is an immigrant at some point. Even Donald Trump's parents.
Unless you're a Native American.
Donald Trump's great-grandpa was a illegal immigrant from Germany.
A draft dodger, just like Donald.
Illegal immigrant. But he wants to close the borders and build a wall and keep immigrants out. Hypocritical. Because without that, if there were walls there would be no Donald Trump. There would be no Donald if there were walls. And that to me is just that's the most telling fact about just the party as a whole. They're ignoring history and making it seem like other people are the issue when they've been the ones in power this entire time.
And with that, we'd like to say to all Americans, happy Juneteenth. And I hope you celebrate, and I hope you have a fantastic day and enjoy your freedoms.
Well,